In the richest city on earth, a man could die of thirst on the fourth floor, 40 feet above a fountain running with clean water. Rome moved more water through its aqueducts every single day than most modern cities do now, and none of it reached his cup. Not because the water wasn't there, because he lives too high up to get to it. That's not poverty the way you picture it. That's poverty engineered right into the architecture. By the end of this, you'll understand how a civilization could raise marble to the sky and still let its poorest citizens die in the shadow of it. Start with where he slept. Most of Rome's poor lived in buildings called insulae, tall wooden and brick apartment blocks stacked 5 or 6 stories high. Ground floor went to shopkeepers and the merely poor. Every floor up, the rent dropped. And every floor up, so did the risk. No plumbing above the second story. No fire escapes, anywhere. You climbed a rickety staircase in the dark, past strangers cooking over open flame in rooms with no water to put it out. Sound familiar yet? It should. This is the oldest housing math in human history. The cheapest place to live is always the most dangerous. We know this isn't guesswork. At Ostia, the port town just outside Rome, entire blocks of these insulae still stand, preserved almost intact. Historians like Peter Garnsey, who spent his career studying how Rome fed itself, used sites like this alongside legal records and grain accounts to reconstruct exactly who ate, who starved, and why. What they found wasn't chaos. It was a system. A brutal, functioning system that decided, floor by floor, who got to survive comfortably and who didn't. Here's the first fact that should stop you. Rome gave away free grain. Not charity, not emergency relief, a permanent government program called the Annona, feeding roughly 200,000 citizens every month at the state's expense. That's welfare on a scale most ancient societies never attempted. So why was our man still hungry? Because the dole covered grain. Just grain. No oil, no wine, no meat, no rent, nothing that turned flour into an actual life. You could receive free food from the emperor himself and still starve slowly, one missing ingredient at a time. And the grain itself came with a catch most people never think about. To collect it, you had to be a Roman citizen, registered, verified, standing in the right line on the right day. That sounds simple until you remember how much of the city wasn't citizens at all. Slaves got nothing. Freedmen sometimes qualified, sometimes didn't, depending on the paperwork of a system with no real appeals process. So picture the hierarchy. Citizen poor, just barely propped up by the state. Freed poor, propped up by luck. Enslaved poor, propped up by nothing at all. 3 men could stand on the exact same street corner, equally hungry, and only one of them had any legal claim to help. Picture him now. It's dawn in the Subura, Rome's most crowded slum, wedged between 2 of the 7 hills. The air already smells like wood smoke and unwashed bodies and the fish stalls opening below. He climbs down 4 flights of stairs that creak under his weight. He's maybe 35, though he looks 50. Sun, hunger, and manual labor age a body fast. He joins a line at a distribution point, waiting for his grain ration, one of a few thousand men doing the exact same thing at the exact same hour, all across the city. No one speaks much. Everyone already knows the script. Then the second fact lands, and this one is worse. Rome's own satirist, Juvenal, complained that the 2 things keeping the city's poor quiet were bread and circuses. Free food and free entertainment, just enough to prevent revolt. That phrase became famous. What's less famous is what it actually implies. The state understood exactly how close to collapse it was running. It wasn't generosity. It was crowd control with better branding. Doesn't that change how you hear bread and circuses now? Midday, and he's working, if he's lucky enough to have work at all. Day labor. Carrying stone, hauling amphorae, whatever needs a back and no skill. Pay is a handful of coins, barely enough for the day's bread and a cup of cheap wine cut with water. There's no savings. There's no next week. Every single day resets to 0, and if he's injured or sick or simply too old to lift anymore, there is no safety net waiting to catch him. Rome had roads that crossed continents. It never built one road out of poverty. Compare that to the men above him, literally and financially. A senator's household could spend in a single dinner more than our man would earn in a decade of hauling stone. That gap wasn't an accident of bad luck. It was structural, baked into a society where land, citizenship, and inherited wealth decided almost everything before a person ever took their first breath. Social mobility existed, technically. A gifted slave could be freed. A freedman's son could occasionally rise, but for the vast majority, the floor you were born on was the floor you died on. And everyone in the Subura understood that arithmetic without needing it explained. Now the shock beat that should genuinely unsettle you. Demographic historians, using tombstone inscriptions and comparative mortality models, estimate that roughly half of all children born into Rome's urban poor didn't survive to age 10. Half. Not from war, not from famine, from ordinary life. Bad water, crowded rooms, disease moving floor to floor in buildings with no ventilation and no escape. The wealthy in their sprawling villas lost children too, but nowhere near at that rate. Same city, same empire, completely different odds of living, decided almost entirely by which street you were born on. Let's sit inside one specific night because the numbers only mean something once you feel them. It's after dark in that same insula. Oil lamps are too expensive to burn for long, so most of the building goes black early. You can hear neighbors through walls thin enough to be more suggestion than barrier. Someone coughing, someone arguing, a baby that won't stop crying no matter what its mother tries. Somewhere 2 floors up, someone has left a cooking fire smoldering a little too long. There's no water main this high, no bucket brigade fast enough, and the wood frame construction goes up like kindling once it starts. Smoke finds the stairwell before flame does, which is worse, because by the time you smell it, the only way down is already filling with it. This happened often enough that Rome's wealthiest men, including a young Crassus, famously built fortunes buying up burning buildings for pennies while the fire was still spreading, negotiating with terrified owners as the flames climbed. Your home, his profit margin. That was the arrangement, and everyone on that 4th floor knew it, the same way you know which parts of a system exist to protect you, and which parts exist to protect everyone but you. Here's the twist, and it's the one that should actually rearrange how you think about ancient Rome. We tend to picture the empire as its monuments, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the roads, the sheer competence of it all. And that competence was real. But it wasn't built for him. It was built despite him, on the assumption that a permanent underclass, crowded into fire traps with no plumbing, was simply the acceptable cost of running a superpower. Rome wasn't failing to solve poverty. Rome had calculated, quite precisely, that it didn't need to. And that's the part that lands closest to home, because we still build this way. Not with insulae, but with the same underlying math. Cheaper materials in poorer neighborhoods, longer commutes for lower wages, safety nets with careful, deliberate gaps in exactly the places that would cost the most to fix. We don't call it bread and circuses anymore. We call it minimum viable support. Just enough to keep things from boiling over, rarely enough to actually change anyone's floor. There's a particular kind of quiet cruelty in a system that gives you just enough to survive and calls it generosity. It lets everyone above feel like the problem is being handled. It lets a senator write sincerely that Rome takes care of its poor, while never once climbing the stairs to check. That's not unique to Rome. That's what every comfortable middle distance looks like, in any century. Close enough to see the smoke, too far away to smell it. The next time you scroll past something built to make you feel like you're being taken care of, ask what it's actually covering and what it very carefully leaves out. So think about him again, climbing those stairs in the dark, 40 feet above water he'll never taste. He never saw the empire the way we do now. Marble, order, grandeur stretching to the horizon. He saw a staircase. He saw a landlord. He saw a ration line at dawn. And somewhere above him, in the richest city on earth, a fountain kept running, close enough to hear, too far to ever reach.